History has a habit of hiding the families who shaped the world, not with armies or empires, but with credit, capital, and influence. Everyone knows the Rothschilds of Europe, the banking dynasty wrapped in legend and myth. But almost no one knows that, on the other side of the world, another financial empire rose even faster and fell even harder. A family so powerful that Asian kings consulted them before signing treaties. A family whose credit network reached from Shanghai to Singapore, Bombay to Hong Kong. A family whose collapse was so catastrophic it triggered economic aftershocks that still influence global finance today. So why don't we hear their name? Why were they buried in footnotes, while Western banking families became household legends? This is the story of the Sassoons, the so-called Rothschilds of the East. Their rise shaped modern Asia. Their downfall reshaped global power. And their disappearance, well, that might be the strangest part of all. Stay with me, because the real mystery isn't how they built a dynasty. It's how the world forgot one of the most powerful families in modern history, setting the stage. A world on the edge of transformation to understand the Sassoons. We need to understand the world they were born into, a world before global banks, before multinational corporations, before credit ratings and stock exchanges connected continents. This was an age where empires were expanding, but financially unstable. Trade routes were exploding with opportunity, but also risk. Entire nations could rise or fall depending on who controlled capital, information, and connections. In Europe, the Rothschilds mastered this system. In Asia, conditions were even more volatile, and that volatility created an opening. Because in the early 1800s, Asia wasn't just a region. It was the economic frontier of the British Empire, the Qing Empire, and competing merchant families who were trying to control flows of silver, textiles, tea, and yes, opium. Into this rapidly shifting world stepped a man whose life would read like a movie script. A man who fled persecution, crossed borders with nothing, and quietly built a global empire. Name? David Sassoon. But before David became the Rothschild of the East, he was something very different. A fugitive, a merchant, a political insider, and eventually the architect of a dynasty that almost rewired global trade. Origins. A dynasty born in exile, the Sassoon family did not begin as global financiers. They began in Baghdad, part of the city's influential Jewish merchant community. David Sassoon, born in 1792, grew up under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. His father, Sheikh Sassoon, Ben Salih, served as the treasurer to the local Ottoman governor, a role of immense responsibility, but also immense danger. Because in the Ottoman world, treasurers weren't just accountants. They were scapegoats whenever political fortune shifted, when shift they did. By the 1820s, Baghdad was engulfed in political turmoil. Factions rose and fell. Accusations flew, and anyone close to the governor's finances became a target. Sassoons had a choice: stay and risk imprisonment or execution, or flee and try to rebuild everything from zero. They chose to flee. David Sassoon arrived in Bombay, modern-day Mumbai, with almost nothing but family connections and a deep understanding of trade networks. And what he built there would become one of the most powerful commercial empires Asia had ever seen. The rise. How the Sassoons built a global financial machine. Right place, right time, because disaster forced at Bombay in the 1830s wasn't the megacity it is today. It was a rising British colonial port, desperate for middlemen who understood both Eastern and Western markets. David Sassoon understood both better than almost anyone. He leveraged his knowledge of Ottoman trade routes, his multilingual background, his merchant connections across Persia, India, and China, and the chaos of the moment. Where others saw instability, David saw opportunity. Started by trading textiles, then cotton. But it wasn't what he traded that made the Sassoons powerful. It was how they traded. The innovation that changed everything. Because David Sassoon built his empire on a single, brilliant strategy: family-controlled nodes in every major port. By installing sons, nephews, and trusted relatives in strategic locations, he formed one of the earliest modern multinational enterprises decades before such a term existed. Within 20 years, Sassoon offices could be found in Bombay, and this network allowed the Sassoons to move goods, money, and information faster than their competitors, because they didn't rely on local agents. They were the agents. And as Britain expanded its control in Asia, the Sassoons expanded right alongside it. They became major suppliers to the British Army. They financed infrastructure. They built mills, warehouses, shipping fleets, and trading firms. The opium controversy, this part is unavoidable. Like many major merchant families in the 19th century, including Jardine, Matheson, and other British firms, the Sassoons profited heavily from the opium trade. It was legal under British colonial law at the time. It was also devastating to China. But the important thing for the story is this. Opium profits provided the liquidity the Sassoons used to build everything else. Real estate empires, cultural centers in India, Hong Kong, and later London, and as they diversified, they became something new, not traders. That evolution earned them their famous nickname, the Rothschilds of the East. Whether the comparison was fair or not doesn't matter. What matters is what it symbolized. A family whose capital shaped economies. The breaking point. The fall begins. Every dynasty rises on a set of conditions. And every dynasty falls when those conditions change. For the Sassoons, the breaking point wasn't a war. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was something far more dangerous. The slow erosion of their competitive advantage. Let's break this down, step by step. The rise of Western banks in Asia. By the mid-1800s, global finance was changing. British banks expanded aggressively into Asia. Telegraph cables connected continents. New corporate structures allowed foreign competitors to scale rapidly. The Sassoons' family-run model started to look outdated. What used to be an advantage, tight internal control, became a bottleneck. Moral and political shifts, the global attitude toward opium shifted. China resisted. Missionaries protested. International pressure mounted. Britain refined its regulations. The Sassoons moved out of opium well before it was outlawed, but by then, the industry that had built their initial wealth was no longer viable. Internal division. David Sassoon built his empire with strict family unity. But after his death, the family faced internal fractures. Different branches disagreed on strategy. Some members moved to London to integrate with elite British society. Others stayed in Asia. This geographic and cultural split weakened the family's cohesion. The shock that exposed it all. The biggest blow came from a force no one could control: the rise of modern industrial capitalism. By the late 19th century, European banks had access to more capital. Joint stock companies scaled faster than family firms. Political power shifted toward states, not merchants. Mass production reduced profit margins. New competitors could undercut Sassoon prices easily. And then came the final blow. World War I, when global trade fractured. The Sassoons, once masters of international networks, lost their most valuable asset. By the mid-1900s, the dynasty that had once rivaled Western banking families was no longer a major player. But here's the thing. They didn't collapse because they failed. They collapsed because the world changed faster than they did. The fallout. How a dynasty disappeared from history. They integrated into British society. Some Sassoons became members of parliament. Some married into British aristocracy. Some changed their names. Some shifted away from business into philanthropy and politics. Each integration brought prestige, but it also diluted their identity as a unique dynasty. The family branches scattered globally: India, China, Britain, the Middle East, Europe, North America. By the mid-20th century, there wasn't one Sassoon family anymore. There were dozens. Their assets were nationalized or declined. India nationalized key industries. China underwent revolution. Globalization changed trade routes. British colonial privileges vanished. The infrastructure the Sassoons built, ports, mills, warehouses, shipping networks, lost their strategic value. The post-war world preferred a different narrative after World War II and decolonization. Histories of global finance shifted toward American banks, European institutions, nation-state-led economic development. Merchant dynasties from the colonial era were often quietly removed from the spotlight, not to hide anything, but because the world preferred a clean narrative, the rise of modern institutions, not families. And so, the Sassoons, despite shaping India, China, and British Asia, became a historical footnote. Failed fixes. Why the dynasty couldn't turn back time, the Sassoons didn't simply accept decline. They tried multiple strategies to preserve their influence. Rapid diversification, different branches attempted, banking, real estate, manufacturing, philanthropy, politics, but diversification only works with strong central leadership, which the family no longer had. Reconnecting the family tree, several attempts were made to unify the Indian and British branches. But by then, lifestyles, beliefs, and priorities were too different. Shifting toward London's financial markets, the London-based branch tried to pivot fully into European finance. But they were now competing directly with the Rothschilds and new American banks firms with far more capital, connections, and institutional structures. Preserving legacy through philanthropy. Some success came from philanthropy. The Sassoon name lives on in schools, libraries, hospitals, cultural institutions, but philanthropy preserves a legacy. It does not preserve power. Modern parallels. Why this story matters now. This isn't just a forgotten chapter of history. It's a warning for today. Right. Because what happened to the Sassoons is happening again right now. Family empires versus corporate empires in the 1800s. Family-run merchant dynasties controlled global trade. Today, family tech dynasties like the companies behind Silicon Valley dominate digital trade. But the lesson is the same. Single-family control works until the world outgrows it. Geopolitical shifts destroy business models. The Sassoons fell because global politics changed. Today's companies face AI regulation, US-China tensions, climate disruptions, new forms of economic nationalism. The pattern repeats. When the world changes faster than you do, your competitive advantage evaporates. Hidden power always becomes visible until it doesn't in the 1800s. Merchant families were the backbone of global systems. Today, investment firms and sovereign wealth funds play that role. But here's the twist. Future generations may barely remember them either. History always rewrites itself to highlight states and institutions, not the families and networks behind them. Concentrated wealth is fragile. The Sassoons appeared unstoppable. Then political change, moral shifts, and competition destroyed their model. Modern data shows the same pattern. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the third generation. 90% lose it by the fourth. The Sassoons lasted longer than most, almost 150 years. But even they could not beat the statistical gravity of wealth dispersion. Final takeaways. What this story really tells us: power depends on systems, not individuals. David Sassoon didn't build an empire because he was brilliant, though he was. He built one because the geopolitical and economic system of the 1800s needed merchants like him. When the system changed, the family's power disappeared with it. Global influence is temporary. The families that shape one era often vanish in the next. Today's powerful tech dynasties and investment giants will likely face the same fate. What we remember and what we forget is not accidental. The Rothschilds remained in public memory partly because Europe wrote the dominant financial histories of the 19th century. The Sassoons disappeared because Asia's colonial era was not a story the post-war world wanted to emphasize. But forgetting them does not diminish their impact. If you found this story enlightening and want to explore more forgotten dynasties, hidden financial histories, and global forces shaping our world, then subscribe for more deep dive documentaries. Like the video to help others discover it. And comment below.